Hi, this is Stacey, the BabyMaker Roberts, and I would love for you to join me in February, our seminar going from unexplained to pregnant. This seminar will help you assist more of your patients by providing you with practical, clinically proven advice on all aspects of unexplained fertility issues, and I can't wait to share it with you. I look forward to seeing you in February, and to register for this event, please go to bioceuticals.com.au and click on the Education tab. See you there.
This is FX Medicine, and I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. And with me on the line today is Stacey Roberts, a former physiotherapist turned herbalist and naturopath. Stacey has been involved in healthcare since 1989 in both conventional and complementary medicine. Stacey is an internationally recognised natural fertility and women's health expert who has assisted people in over 32 countries with improving their overall health and well-being by addressing not just their physical but also their physiological and psychological health with complementary products and services. Stacey is an international speaker and best-selling author, having authored or co-authored over 7 books or ebooks, and has regularly been featured on many TV shows, including A Current Affair, Sunrise, Win TV in Australia, but also being filmed by the Discovery Channel and even appearing on Oprah. And if that's not enough of a CV, Stacey has also featured in such magazines as Vogue and Grazia, as well as numerous local and regional newspapers in Australia. Stacey took over Sharkey's Healing Centre in Nerang in 2004, a clinic that has worked with couples to have created over 6,000 babies while on her program. Most were told it would never happen for them. To crown this off, Sharkey's Healing Centre, under the direction of Stacey, received the 2007 Stevie Award for the best overall company in Asia, subcontinent Australia and New Zealand. Now, you've got to be doing something right, Stacey, because of that, not just that award, but also your CV. So I welcome you back to FX Medicine to talk today about male infertility.
It's fantastic to be back, Andrew. Thank you for having me.
Now, I've got to say, I'm super impressed with what you've done, but also how you help people. It's not just about a program. You personalise medicine for people's particular presentations. Today we're going to be talking about male infertility, as I said. And when most people think of infertility, they tend to think immediately of it being a women's issue. But this just isn't the case, right?
That's correct. I mean, that idea of it only being a women's issue actually happened to me years ago. About 15 years ago, I was having difficulty having another child and was diagnosed with secondary infertility. The doctors basically just looked at my situation and couldn't find anything, so it was unexplained in my case. And it wasn't until my husband at the time, actually 3 years later after the diagnosis, thought maybe he should get tested. So, and it turned out there was a male factor fertility issue there that wasn't even suggested to be looked at even by the medical establishment. So it is definitely something that's an undertow that we just kind of assume that it's a woman's issue.
And that, that must place a surprising amount of guilt on women who already beat themselves up about pregnancy issues right through. I mean, that's incredible.
That's correct. Yeah, most women feel completely disempowered and feel guilty for waiting too long, or guilty for, not finding the right person, or guilty for being the one that is, keeping them from having a child. And it's really just not the case. Up to 50% of couples dealing with fertility issues could be an issue with male or female fertility. So about 20% of the couples who are diagnosed as infertile would have an issue solely with male fertility. But really, it's something that both partners should be evaluated about and looked into in detail.
So did you say 20% of infertility issues are really a male issue?
It's only male issue, correct.
I'm sorry, but that's staggering. Why isn't medicine looking at this as a normal part of screening?
Well, I think it's becoming, since I experienced the issue, it's becoming much more prevalent to test the male in the situation. But many times up to 20 to 25% of couples dealing with fertility issues aren't even tested in regard to semen analysis. Now, is that the couple themselves, or is that the physician not suggesting it? I would imagine it's a combination of both.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something that needs to be looked at. And as we'll get in today, even the testing for male fertility doesn't necessarily always uncover all the issues that there could be with male fertility. And that's why sometimes it goes unexplained, or there's difficulty becoming pregnant with the assisted reproductive techniques as well.
Well, let's go into those causes. What are the causes of infertility in males?
They are, a lot of them are the same as what the causes are for infertility in fertility issues. I don't like to use the word infertility, so I usually just call it fertility issues. Yeah. But are the same as what females deal with. So hormone imbalances, issues with testosterone production, stress. But when we look at male fertility in particular, also nutrient imbalances or nutrient deficiencies, things like that, poor diets, lifestyle factors. But when we look at male fertility in particular, one of the things that stands out is environmental exposures seem to be more prevalent in male fertility cases simply because of the careers, occupations, and jobs of these men. Oftentimes they're more exposed to chemicals than perhaps the typical job for females. So the environmental factors, such as exposure to heavy metals in the mining industry, or different chemicals from jobs in manufacturing, carpenters, painters, plasterers, these fumes that they're breathing in, all can be endocrine disruptors and then impact their ability to create the sperm. And the quality of the sperm often suffers as well.
What about things like sexually transmitted diseases and previous infections like mumps when they were children? Sure.
There's certainly those issues that are also part of why men are experiencing fertility issues. But honestly, in the clinic, those are very few and far between in comparison to most things that are kind of what the medical establishment would say unexplained for male fertility issues. But when you look at the environment that the man's working in, there's a clear correlation between the amount of chemical exposure he's dealing with and the issues that he's having in regards to male fertility. I'll give you one example. It was a couple that came to see me, again, for secondary fertility issues. The male was not tested. So when I suggested that it get tested, he was happy to do so, but didn't think there was going to be a problem because they already had one child without an incident. They went to get tested and came up with he had 0 sperm. So they were both shocked, and one comment from the doctor just kind of threw them both over the edge. Was the doctor said, "Well, you're probably born this way." So immediately what happened was the male partner thought that his wife had cheated on him and that the child that they had was not his. So that after paternity testing, certainly in fact proved that he was the father, they were wondering, what the heck happened? How could he father a child and then all of a sudden not have any sperm? So we went back and looked at his timeline in regards to his job, and at first he was in a job where he wasn't exposed to any particular high level of chemicals, but then he started working in landscaping, and where he was doing a lot of spraying, he was breathing in a lot of the fumes from the chemicals in regards to his job. That happened approximately 1 year before his first child was conceived, so it didn't seem to impact his situation at that point. But now this was 3 or 4 years later after he'd been in that job for that period of time, and now he was no longer producing any sperm. In his situation, he was able to leave that job. Not all situations will allow that to happen, but in his situation, he was able to leave that job or chose to leave and worked again. And it took about 18 months for us to be able to work together to help him be able to create sperm enough that they could conceive again with their second child.
Wow.
So that's one example of how that, an extreme example, because, I haven't seen that very often. But again, it's one example of how that prolonged chemical exposure can impact male fertility.
That's a happy ending to an atrocious start of a story, I've got to say.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I have to ask the question, and I don't think it's going to be a huge issue in today's cultural society or fashion society, but certainly, back in the 70s when very tight jeans in males was the in thing. But what about excess heat, particularly around the scrotal area, and tight clothing? Do you still see those as an issue mainly in maybe older men seeking to be fathers?
Not necessarily older men. And by the way, Andrew, I'm getting a visual of you in those tight skinny jeans or whatever you're talking about. So I've got to move away from that.
I never did.
Focus on this. In regards to the age of the male who's dealing with those issues in regards to heat, it really can vary and go right along the age spectrum. For example, a lot of studies are showing that, I shouldn't say a lot, a few studies have shown that, setting the laptop computer on a male person's lap and the heating up of that computer plus the position in which the male is sitting also increases the heat and has been heat in the testicle area or the scrotum and has been correlated with decreased count in men.
Wow.
So and then the use of hot tubs has also been correlated with decreased motility in men. So that fortunately, and both things fortunately can be reversed by keeping that area cool and avoiding things like hot tubs, especially, a few weeks prior to timing of intercourse if you're trying to become pregnant.
Yeah. And what about our typical modern day society scourge, obesity?
Oh, absolutely. And that's, again, one thing that also impacts female fertility significantly. So the inflammation, certainly, as we know, is a detriment to our health for so many reasons linked to chronic disease, but it also can impact fertility without a doubt. Now, not all obese men will have issues with their sperm, but if I lined up 10 obese men, one might have high blood pressure, one might have other cardiovascular issues, one might develop cancer, and one might have fertility issues, and on and on. So it's going to manifest itself differently in each person, but there's definitely been a correlation with obese men and overweight men who have issues with their sperm count or quality. And once that is rectified, then we see an improvement in both of those those parameters and even morphology as well.
So we've spoken about sperm counts and morphology. What about physical things that cause infertility? And they're sort of comorbid with things like obesity and the sequelae like cardiovascular disease, and that's things that like erectile dysfunction and low libido.
There's so many things that go into low libido that it's difficult to to talk about here that one thing causes that. Men with normal testosterone levels, for example, can have low libido. But erectile dysfunction, inability to maintain an erection, that can be due to the arteriosclerosis in the arteries, supplying the blood to the penis. So just as we could have issues with, the arteries supplying blood through and to the heart and away from the heart, we have issues. We can have the same, or men can have the same issues with maintaining an erection. So again, when we go back to what I mentioned about chronic disease and inflammation being related to so many chronic diseases like cardiovascular disease, it only makes sense that if those things are rectified, if the cause of those issues are addressed, then those issues can be improved upon. Now, there are some men who have very low testosterone levels, which can be related to significant long-term adrenal stress. That could be either from emotional stress, just working themselves to the bone, which is, I see a lot in the clinic, is that, they may have a job and then they're working a side job, or they may have a job and then they're trying to renovate their house, or they may have a job and then they're trying to study full-time. This happens with both females and males. All that stress can impact their cortisol levels, which in turn can impact their testosterone levels, and certainly thyroid, plays a role in that too, and then impacts their fertility as well. And, when you're that busy, you oftentimes aren't paying attention to what you're eating very well and, not as active as you should be. So all those things definitely contribute. And then the emotional aspect of dealing with fertility issues just in general can wear a couple down, and certainly can affect the male as well as the female. So it can be a very stressful situation, especially when there's performance anxiety, when men and women are trying to do time intercourse at a certain time every month. She's looking at her watch. He wants to watch the end of the footy game. And, there can be an issue with, hey, let's take 10 minutes and get this over with, instead of
10? Whoa.
What, instead of what intercourse should be between couples, as, sharing that intimacy.
Yeah.
I actually had an interesting conversation with one of my patients who was a very quiet guy. He was very reserved, kind of sat there with his arms folded for most of the appointment. And one time he just opened up because he was just so frustrated he said he felt like he was an animal at a circus and told when he had to just perform. And he actually felt that having intercourse with his wife was the way he best expressed his emotional attachment or emotion towards her. And now that was taken away, and he was really struggling with that whole aspect of that as well.
Yeah, I've heard that myself. I've heard of people saying, but basically the male was told, hop on.
Right.
And there was no intimacy,
Exactly.
There was no romance. What
right.
I find,
or if they're dealing with the IVF as well too, Andrew, they're what do they do? They show up and they give the sample and out you go. So it's it impacts them both from a natural point of view and also with conventional reproductive techniques as well.
And I think it's people need to realise that men aren't just these animals that, yep, sure, sex, I just need a place. I don't need a time. I don't think that's true. Indeed, a lot of couples that I've spoken to, it's the female libido that appears to be waning, certainly later on in life. When I say later on in life, let's say around, I'm talking about the reproductive years, so let's say around sort of mid to late 30s, whereas the males are all gung-ho. So there seems to be this dystony between the male and female connection. Do you find that's a big issue? Do you feel that they need to go back and reconnect often?
Oh, absolutely. And we discuss this in the clinic a lot, and I think this is often overlooked and not discussed with the couple. And when it is discussed, it kind of has them both breathe a sigh of relief because they're both thinking it, but they're not necessarily telling each other how frustrated they are. So when you bring up the fact that, she oftentimes will say to herself, well, what's the point? Why, if we know if we can only have sex at these certain times, what's the point of having sex any other time? I really don't feel like it anyway. And he's going, well, geez, the only time she wants to have sex with me is to make a baby. It can become a real big issue between them because they've lost that intimate connection. Because he extends, maybe tries to become intimate, and she kind of pushes him away, going, oh no, we'll do this next week when I'm ovulating, type of thing. So it can become a big issue, and she's trying to do the right thing to create a baby and manage all the other things she's managing in her life, but not realizing she's pushing him away. And he's not realizing how important it is to her that, this has to happen at certain times in order for them to create a baby. So there's a lot of miscommunication, and we talk about that and get it out on the table so that they can, relate this to each other. And then we work together to kind of figure out what's the best way for them to reconnect. Yeah. Because what I tell couples is they can definitely, fertility issues can either bring them closer together and stronger as a couple or tear them apart. Yeah. So they have to make a decision which way they want to go with that. Most of them are very open to discussing that once it's brought out and put out there.
How very interesting. Getting back to the physical again, how would you talk about, symptomatology to discern erectile dysfunction that is physical in nature rather than emotional in nature? Are there any signs and symptoms, like, for instance, morning erection or not?
Sure. I mean, those things can be things like morning erections can certainly be a sign or signal that there may or may not be issues. But really, it's about getting a detailed history and seeing what fits, what pieces of the puzzle fit together. For example, if you have a gentleman who is only having issues when the timing of intercourse around ovulation, and every other time he it can become erect either through masturbation or in other times of intercourse, you know that it's clearly most likely an emotional issue.
Yeah.
If he's having difficulty maintaining an erection at other times, or if there's been history of this, outside of them trying to have a baby, certainly we look at more physiological things.
Right.
We also then look at their, and you can never really separate the two, can you? So you look at both situations and you look at what they're doing in regards to work history, and broaching the subject is often uncomfortable for men because they're not used to talking to someone about it, and sometimes talking to a woman about it besides their wife is even more embarrassing. So the building of rapport is extremely important with these guys, so that they feel as though you're not trying to tell them that there's something wrong with them too. You're just trying to help them both create what they want and allow them to become closer and allow them to just be healthier in general, moving forward. So building rapport is a big issue because some men are resistant to looking at their situation, especially if they've been told that their semen analysis is fine. Whereas sometimes I'll look at a semen analysis and go, well, actually, it isn't fine if you look at these parameters and the parameters that we see in our clinic where we see most pregnancies happening. So if you don't build that rapport, they're going to be a lot less receptive to any suggestions that you make, or if they were basically dragged into the consultation. So there's women who I'll say to them, look, if your husband doesn't want to come to this consultation, do not make him because it'll be a waste of your money and his time. And let's let you be the example of how well you're feeling. And if he doesn't think that he has a fertility issue, then your example will at least help him want to feel better. And the changes that you're making in your eating and all those things hopefully will flow onto him. But men who do have fertility issues range from being very embarrassed and not wanting to talk about it to be very intrigued and wanting to address it so that they can take care of it.
Yeah.
So it really is about building rapport and seeing who that person is sitting in front of you. For example, I might a kind of a sporty, competitive guy. I've said a few times to them, put tribulus in your formula. In this case, horrible. I'm not sure that you can handle it. And then they kind of get all puffed up, and I'm like, I can handle that.
Yeah.
And then they're compliant with their herbal formula. Whereas another man may be sitting in front of you and you notice that he is very caring and very sensitive and very supportive of his wife. So you may, talk to him about him doing this part of the program is going to help his wife as well get through this very difficult time. So you have to know the person sitting in front of you or get to know them.
Yeah. So going back to that 20% of males, of couples seeking infertility treatment, when would you suspect that it's a male issue as opposed to something to do with the ovum or ova? Any signs and symptoms that are key that you'd be looking for? And how do you then broach that with regards to the fragile male ego? This burden of guilt or resentment on the male's part.
Well, first of all, I never really look at any situation as only a female issue or only a male issue. And this is how I approach it with the couples. And whether it's, the female only sitting in front of me or both of them sitting in front of me, is that there needs to be a healthy egg and a healthy sperm and a healthy environment for that embryo to attach to. So I always am trying to move away from blame and really support the idea of responsibility. So if you need a healthy egg and a healthy sperm, doesn't it make sense for both of you to work on trying to get those cells as healthy as possible, just like you want your heart cells to be healthy or your skin cells to be healthy. So when you take it away from that personal fertility, blame, it's your fault, or this is the issue, many times that they can relax and find it a lot easier to accept what you're saying, so you can broach those subjects without them becoming defensive. In regards to how do I discern whether it's a male or female fertility issue, at the initial consultation, what has the diagnostics prior to coming to see me. Even a woman with normal regular cycles can still have difficulty conceiving. And a male who we've improved his sperm count doesn't necessarily guarantee that that pregnancy is going to be created. So again, it's more about not placing blame, but looking at responsibility for both of them. Now, that being said, if a woman's gone through IVF 7 times and embryos aren't progressing, and she keeps going through IVF because she thinks it's her fault, and nobody's been talking about how the sperm is so important in early embryonic development and the health of the fetus in general, then I'm going to be, bringing that up as well and saying, look, you've done this 7 times and it hasn't worked, or however many times and it hasn't worked. Doesn't it make sense to bring in 50% of the situation and try to improve that as well?
Yeah. Indeed, like when we're talking about, the male sperm development, how do you get males to adhere to dietary and lifestyle changes when, we're, I'm going to say the word lazy, but that's not correct. Let's say distracted. Let's say distracted. But how do you get males to be compliant when we have that male bravado to overcome?
Some males just won't be. And I think as a therapist, as a practitioner, you really have to understand that. And some females won't be, although they tend to be more compliant because of the driving force for them, seeing. But some males won't be compliant, and what I find is that's a small percentage. And the other men who are seeing me where a fertility issue has been diagnosed may be uncomfortable at first and don't want to necessarily look at it, admit it, but they also want to get that monkey off their back and want to try to address it.
Yeah.
Now, yes, they also may not make the connection of the food that they're putting in their body. It could be impacting or what they're eating, what they're exposed to even outside of the body, maybe impacting their situation. That's where rapport and education comes in. And it's so extremely important in every aspect of dealing with fertility issues, whether it's male fertility, female fertility, or anything, is to really, break it down and just don't say, here's these herbs, so we would say, here's this pill to get rid of your headache. We have to help them understand physiologically what we're trying to accomplish. And make that connection so that they get it, so that they understand why zinc is important. They understand why taking this probiotic is important. They understand why their herbal formula is going to be beneficial to them. If we just slide this stuff across the table and collect money from them, then, oftentimes they're going to, if they're not pregnant, or there's no change in, a month or two, they're going to just say, bugger this, it's not working.
Yeah.
And also correlating their treatment with long-term health. One of the things that I say to my patients is, look, I can't guarantee that you're going to become pregnant, but what I can do is I can guarantee that if you follow these instructions and we work together as a team, the chances of you becoming pregnant are much higher. But the fact that what I can guarantee is that you'll be healthier in the long run.
Yeah, that's right.
What do you have to lose to do this? And most people really get that.
Yeah, to me that's kind of like I once asked a pilot of a commercial airline, I said, how do you cope with the stress of the worry about all of those passengers behind you and ensuring their safety? And he, somewhat callously, but I get his meaning, he said, I don't think about them at all. If I land the plane safely for me, they're safe. And it was kind of like, so, if the husband and wife are healthy, then they're giving the best chance possible for a healthy fetus and baby to develop.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then they know they've done everything they can to work together towards this thing that they want so much, this life that they long for, is what I say in some of my articles on my website. But, men, sometimes you need a little bit of help, and not in the area of compliance. But with my book, The Fertility Bible, I oftentimes will discuss with the females to just earmark certain pages. Don't make them read the whole thing. Just earmark certain pages where it's relevant for male fertility and where you want them to read, and set it out and ask them to read it, put it by the bedside, to get where they're going to see it, and then expose them to it in that way, so in small doses. Now, it might seem like we're treating them like children, or that we're dancing around a fragile male ego, but at the end of the day, really, who cares if it helps to manage things and it makes a difference and it helps them as a couple? Why not?
I have to giggle these days when my wife leaves me a page out of a magazine to read, just conspicuously left somewhere. And I just have to go, oh, I got another one to learn, have I? Another lesson. So
exactly.
Without giving too much away, because people can learn all there is to learn with your BabyMaker program. But what sort of natural medicines do you use to treat male infertility? And how does your treatment fit into or differ from, a standard approach?
Everyone's different. And we've talked about this in other podcasts too, that, one protocol for male fertility is not going to be great for everyone who's dealing with male fertility issues. For example, we talked earlier about mumps, but undescended testicles is an issue in some men who've had, an issue with undescended testicles when they're younger, and then the testicle brought down and they can have lower sperm counts. Oftentimes we may not see an improvement in quantity, but we could see an improvement in quality. So I wouldn't necessarily put them on the same protocol that someone who has, low testosterone, erectile dysfunction on. So, as we talk about this, I just want to keep the listeners abreast of the fact that they still have to look at each person individually and come up with that formulation that's going to be best for them. But tribulus is oftentimes utilized for its, especially Bulgarian tribulus, which Terry Bone has talked about, over and over in regards to the research out there about Bulgarian tribulus. So it's important for us to remember to use the best quality product, and that's been great for helping to improve libido, improve testosterone levels, and in turn improve sperm count in some men. The other thing that we have used with men who have low testosterone, and this should be looked at, is DIM and estrogen clearance. So that if the testosterone levels are being converted too quickly into estrogen, then that can cause many issues with male health, including male fertility issues.
Yeah.
So helping the body convert or slow down that aromatase activity to maintain good, healthy testosterone levels is another thing that's really important.
Yeah.
The other thing to look at is gut health, especially if they don't have a very good eating plan or have had a long history of antibiotic use. We want to make sure, or drinking lots of alcohol and have lots of sugar. We want to make sure they're getting addressing their eating plan for sure. That goes without saying, I would hope. But after addressing their eating plan, making sure they're on a good probiotic, that can help promote optimal gut function as well. And then we look at, if they have low testosterone, why do they? Is it because they're exposed to chemicals and this might be, impacting thyroid function? Is it because it's adrenal stress? So adaptogens would be great for supporting the adrenals, and withania would be great for supporting thyroid function. You have to check to see if they're iodine deficient, to see if bladder might be something, or iodine supplementation. Vitamin D levels is really important as well. So all these things are really important for you to look at. A good nutritional supplementation program, a good solid herbal tincture based on what you're seeing in front of you in regards to their history and their current state of health and blood test results, etc. And then obviously looking at their eating plan as well, and minimizing any other exposure that they can control to environmental issues, like what they're putting on their body. In their house, are they drinking filtered water? Things like that minimize exposure in other places where they can control, versus at work they may not be able to control exposure that they're dealing with.
I just wanted to reiterate for our listeners the point that you made about tribulus. Decades ago now, there was a product, the original Bulgarian product was called Tribostan. And then it was compared to some other tribulus terrestris products from other regions. And they found much lower levels of the protodiosine in these other tribulus products. So then it was,
Right.
you made the point about Kerry Bone. Kerry Bone made the point, and he said you've got to be using the stuff that's got good levels of the protodiacin, and the original one was tribostan. I remember him talking about that years ago now. We tend to, I'm not saying to standardise to one supposed active ingredient, but this certainly seems to be a marker compound of importance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I do have men with low sperm counts whose testosterone is normal, which in the early days of specializing fertility, I was really surprised. I thought that, that's the reason why all sperm counts would be low or, without a structural issue. But there are men who have normal testosterone levels, free testosterone, total testosterone, that don't necessarily need tribulus, but need that support for their adrenals, need lifestyle, counseling, and gut issue, gut support, and all those types of things. Fish oil, again, is a great support system for many health issues, but specifically to sperm morphology. There's been studies showing that fish oil has been correlated with improved sperm morphology in men. So potentially the anti-inflammatory aspect of fish oil, or the essential fatty acids in the formation of the sperm, could be supportive in that area.
Stacey, moving on from treatment approach, how then do you measure success in males? Is it as simple as measuring, sperm quality or motility, or do you look long term at just, the end stage, which is pregnancy outcome?
Well, one thing that I discuss with my patients as well is I get away from the idea of success because, and patients are inundated with, success rates this, success rates that.
Yeah.
And the reason I get away from the success is because if they don't succeed, what's the alternative? Yeah. So over and over and over, they're considered themselves as a failure going through these fertility issues. So I always talk about creating a viable pregnancy. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the terminology that I use, and I hope more people use that as well to take away that success failure kind of attitude that people have, or the achievement and failure attitude that people have going in it, because it puts a lot of extra stress and pressure on the couple. That being said, they've come to see me for fertility issues. They come to see me to improve their chances of having a baby. So ultimately, that's what we want to see. But that's, doesn't happen usually overnight. So we have to set, short little goals in between, little kind of milestones that we want to get to in order to improve the chances of creating this viable pregnancy. So we would look at, improvements in sperm count and quality or morphology, depending on what the issue is that they came to see me, or all three if they're having issues with all of that. And we do testing of their hormone levels, especially free testosterone, total testosterone, and others, steroid, adrenal, etc. And then we measure, we get those baselines, and then we measure the progress of those throughout the 3 months that they're seeing me. And then at that 3-month mark, if they haven't been sick or ill, because that can impact the results. If they've needed antibiotics, that can impact their results. If they've, gone out with the guys for a big blowout, that could eventually impact the results. So if in 3 months' time they've been able to follow the program sufficiently, then we would look at having another semen analysis to measure the improvement. We want to make sure they go to the same place that they went previously, because we do find that semen analysis from one lab can be oftentimes not as accurate or very different from semen analysis from another lab. And we encourage them to utilize IVF clinics for their services in regards to comprehensive semen analysis. And even then, sometimes they're not as detailed as I would like. The other thing we also look at, Andrew, is we also suggest that if they do go to an IVF clinic to have that comprehensive semen analysis done, that they also have a wash done, a wash or a prep, which means they basically spin the sperm and prepare it as if they were going to do a procedure. Yeah. So what this does is gives us an idea of how, after that preparation and wash, how many sperm are left. And if the count significantly decreases from the fresh sample to the wash sample, then we oftentimes see that there's a quality issue. So in the semen analysis, we might ask them to do that as well.
Right.
So those are the parameters that we look at and set as milestones, and this needs to be explained to the couple from the start. Because if you just give them herbs or supplements and they go away, and then in 3 months' time they do a test and it's no different or worse, and they don't have any idea why that would be, they're clearly not going to come back, and they're clearly not going to be on board that this is working.
Yeah.
So that's the way we handle it in the clinic, to give them that approach that, okay, there's milestones that we need to hit. And if we're not hitting them, we need to evaluate and dig a little bit deeper and see what's going on, so that we can hit those milestones and ultimately help a couple create a viable pregnancy, naturally or with IVF.
Without sort of painting a glossy picture that, all is good and no failures are encountered, can you give us some examples of male infertility cases that you've treated and, the sort of the progress that happened and their outcome?
Sure. So we talked about secondary infertility case that I had where the gentleman ended up having no sperm. There was another case of azoospermia where a gentleman who was a truck driver, he was extremely obese, BMI above 30, and basically sat in a truck. He was a long haul trucker, and he also had sperm, but none of them were alive. So in the sperm ejaculate, they were all dead, although they were there. So I guess technically that's not azoospermia, but basically he was producing sperm, but none of them were swimming or alive.
Yeah.
So after going through our program, it took about 14, 16 months of working with him on, an optimal eating plan, a weight loss program, and also working with him on keeping the scrotal area a little bit cooler. He was able to start producing sperm as well in that period of time. Now, again, that's not overnight, and that can be a long time for some patients to wait. But one thing I want to point out about him is he was very proactive in his treatment as well. So he's sitting in his truck driving, long haul, and he developed this kind of contraption where he used frozen peas to cool the scrotum area as he was driving, because he was doing everything he possibly could to make sure that he was creating the right environment for those little guys to be swimming as healthily as possible.
He would have had an interesting look on his face from other drivers passing by.
Exactly.
I actually remember Bob Buse talking about scrotal cooling sacks available. I think they were a Swedish invention. This is decades ago. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's actually a pair of underwear now that talk about that and have some substance like silver or something running through it that can also decrease the electromagnetic radiation from devices to supposedly help with sperm count and quality. One thing we didn't talk about, Andrew, that I wanted to just put in here now when I talk about cases is celiac disease. Yeah. It's not often thought of a lot, but I've seen it a few times in male fertility cases where there has been undiagnosed issues with gluten intolerance, and once those were diagnosed and gluten was avoided completely, we've seen sperm count improve significantly. Now, we also have people who are gluten sensitive, which we recommend removing the gluten and obviously making other dietary changes where we've seen improvement as well. And it's not always a gut issue that's going to point you to celiac. For example, one male who was only 28 didn't have any gut issues, at least that I was able to get out of him, or that he talked about. But because he had this kind of strange reaction and issue at work, he worked as a salesperson, and whenever he would get really, really stressed, or it had to be extremely stressed, so it wasn't something that happened every day, but extremely stressed, he would pass out. So we had all these cardiac workups done, and everything came back normal, and they just said, look, you have to manage your stress.
Wolf Parkinson,
I thought to myself, well, why not? Why don't we just check to see if you potentially have celiac? His celiac antibodies were elevated, and then he had the gastroscopy, which confirmed he had damage to the villi. So sometimes it's things like that where you do have to be a bit of a detective to see what's going on, and someone who otherwise would be healthy, except for this kind of strange little incident that they had.
And did both of these individuals have low iron?
The person with celiac disease did.
Yeah. Yep.
The gluten sensitivity, it varies. Many, obviously, as you know, many women with gluten sensitivity or gluten intolerance would have low iron, which is exacerbated by having a menstrual cycle every month. But men, I don't always see that, or I don't see heaps of men with celiac disease. But in the few that I have seen, I do remember for sure that the one did have low iron.
Stacey, what about this growing issue? I recently glanced at a paper, and I've got to say I haven't read it, but it was association of the methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase gene, C677T polymorphism, with the risk of male infertility, a meta-analysis published in Renal Failure, 2015 November. The author is Zhu, Z-H-U, initial X. Can you talk to me about that issue? How big an issue is this of folate metabolism?
I don't think we know how big it is. I think if you look at every health issue we could look at, and again, chronic diseases, female fertility, miscarriage issues, we're finding now that the research is being done and accumulating to such a degree that these things are able to be correlated with things such as female fertility issues or male fertility issues. So I don't think we know what the prevalence is at this point. And the thing about that is, we may all have these. Well, we do all have SNPs, issues with mutant genes, basically, that aren't working the way that they should. But not all of us have issues as a result of having those SNPs.
Yeah.
Now, certainly, what we eat and how we're taking care of our life in regards to stress and supplementation, etc., gut health, all of that will, allow these things to be expressed or not expressed, depending again on our genetic makeup. And I think the research is too early to really discern who is going to be okay with that SNP and who's going to be not okay with that.
Yeah.
Because I think there's more to it. But especially with someone who is as far as you know, and as far as they say, is doing everything that you're asking them to, which, for me is doing the supplementation program. Number one, doing, optimizing their eating plan, decreasing their toxic exposure to whatever degree they can, exercising and managing their stress. If they're doing all those things and you really get a sense that they are on board with the program and things are improving, then that certainly can be an issue that has not really been explored in depth. And I think it's really the wave of the future. Epigenetics in general, I think, is.
There's a lot more to work out, though, first before we think that we can just treat people for a SNP and then everything's going to be well.
Exactly, and that's the caution that I say to people out there is that patients have to fork out a lot of money for fertility anyway. So always be cognizant of what's going to be cost effective, and if they can improve their situation by making dietary changes and utilizing herbal formula, and you're helping them choose the appropriate supplementation, and that can help them become pregnant of hundreds of dollars worth of tests that they may not have. Some people will want all those tests, but some people just will not want to pay for them. Yeah. You have to be cognizant of what the patient wants, and not just tell them to do $500-$600 worth of testing, which may or may not come out with information that is really relevant to them. So it's a balancing act, really, and also understanding what your patient wants.
And along that lines of practical intervention versus testing, there was an interesting write-up of a paper, and this is in The Scientist magazine. The title is "Obesity Alters Sperm Epigenome." December 3rd, 2015, and they were talking about methylation issues. But what do you treat? You're talking about treating the obesity. So it was really interesting, that one. Stacey, you've gone through a couple of caveats about, being cautious about measuring success versus failure and putting the male into a negative mind. about over-treatment of certain conditions like SNPs versus practical treatment of who's sitting in front of you and the couple there. What other caveats should pracies be aware of or forewarned of before treating infertility, especially in males?
And that's a great question, Andrew. And I think it really is not just about how we're treating fertility, but how we're treating anyone that's coming to see us, is looking at this as a team approach, and that you are a supportive member of their team. You're not trying to replace their physician. And sometimes they're angry with their physician because their physician has either not told them something that you've uncovered or presented to them, or their physician has told them it can't happen for them, or their physician says maybe you have to have IVF and they just don't want to do that. So I would say another caveat would be to make sure that you're nurturing that relationship between the patient and the physician, as well as your relationship with the physician, whether that's directly by speaking to them or indirectly by sending them a note, or indirectly through the patient by supporting them in regards to their relationship with that physician. Because there can be a lot of animosity in between them, but also there can be sometimes it's the, and this is not necessarily with someone who's diagnosed with male fertility issues, but for someone who you say, look, your morphology is actually lower than what is recommended, even from medical standard, and the doctor hasn't brought that up to you, the patient may just kind of brush that off because the doctor said everything was fine. I run into that many times, but the doctor says I'm okay, so I don't need to work on anything.
Right.
So again, it's about establishing that rapport with the patient, that you're not trying to replace the doctor. You're just trying to point out some things that may be helpful for them, because whatever you were doing previously isn't working, and you want whatever they do, whether it's a combination of working with you and working with the physician, or just working with you, or even later just working with the physician. You want that to work. So you want to create the best environment for that to work, and no animosity, no matter what your personal beliefs are about IVF or any assisted reproductive technique. Leave that outside the door, because whatever your personal belief is may not be the same as the couple sitting in front of you, and you have to respect what they want and need for themselves.
Hear. Couldn't agree with you more. Well said. Stacey, there's so many other aspects that we need to explore, and for our listeners, we'll be doing further podcasts with Stacey Roberts, otherwise known as the BabyMaker. So I look forward to talking to you and delving into practical aspects of treating all of these other conditions that can impact on fertility. But the thing that I really love about you, Stacey, is that you take a technical thing and you take it back to that couple sitting in front of you who want a baby, and it's all about them. That's what I really appreciate about you. So thank you very much.
No worries, Andrew. Thank you so much for your time.
This is FX Medicine, and I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. As the functional approach to medicine continues to evolve, we are now witnessing the emergence of a powerful systems-orientated model capable of addressing the healthcare needs of the 21st century. In April 2016, Bioceuticals will be holding the 4th Bioceuticals Research Symposium to provide healthcare professionals with leading, cutting-edge research highlighting the future of integrative and functional medicine. We've chosen the world's leading functional medicine experts to show you how they integrate the explosion of research with the latest in genetic science, nutrition, and metabolic medicine. For more information, please visit the Bioceuticals website at bioceuticals.com.au.